The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room Park Ji-yeon had ever seen. It stretched so far that the ceiling disappeared into shadows. 400 alien species sat in floating seats that circled around a central platform. Each seat held a delegate from a different world. Some had scales, some had feathers, some looked like nothing she could describe. All of them were looking at her. Ji-yeon stood alone on the platform. She was 38 years old, thin and tired from the long journey. She wore a simple black suit. Behind her, a holographic display showed the blue and green sphere of Earth, her home. 8 billion people were counting on her today. "Honored members of the council," she began. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this speech 100 times. "Humanity comes before you with respect. We ask only for a chance to join your defense network, a chance to prove ourselves." She talked about Earth's history. She talked about human achievements. She talked about how far they had come in just 200 years of space travel. She talked about peace and cooperation and shared futures. When she finished, there was silence. Then a deep laugh echoed through the hall. High Chancellor Velroth rose from his seat. He was ancient, his skin like cracked stone, his eyes burning with cold light. His species had ruled the stars for 50,000 years. To him, humanity was nothing, less than nothing. "Peace?" Velroth said. His voice boomed across the chamber. "Cooperation? Let us see what humanity truly is." He waved his hand. The hologram behind Ji-yeon changed. Now it showed images from Earth's past. Wars. Bombs falling on cities. Mushroom clouds rising into the sky. Forests burning. Oceans filled with poison. Humans killing humans. Century after century of blood. "This is humanity," Velroth announced. "A species that cannot stop destroying itself. A species so young they still play with nuclear fire. A species so violent they make weapons before they make medicine." Laughter spread through the council. Hundreds of aliens pointed at the images. They shook their heads. They whispered to each other. Ji-yeon felt her face grow hot. But she did not look away. She had expected this. "We have changed," she said. "We learned from our mistakes." "Changed?" Velroth laughed again. "Your species is barely 300,000 years old. My people were building cities when yours were still living in caves. You are children, dangerous children. And children do not sit at this table." He called for a vote. The question was simple. Should humanity be allowed into the Stellar Defense Network? This network protected all Council worlds from outside threats. Without it, a planet was alone in the darkness of space. The votes came quickly. Red lights appeared on screen after screen. No, 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 no. 400 species voted no. Not a single one voted yes. Velroth smiled. It was not a kind smile. "The motion fails. Humanity is denied protection. Perhaps in 10,000 years when you have grown up, you may ask again." Ji-yeon nodded slowly. She had lost. She knew she would lose before she came here, but she had to try. She turned to leave. Then her communication device buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her face went pale. "Wait," she called out. Her voice cracked. "I have just received a message. The void swarm has been detected. They are heading toward Earth." The laughter stopped. Every alien in the room knew about the void swarm. They were monsters from the empty spaces between galaxies. They traveled in fleets of thousands. They consumed everything in their path. Planets, moons, entire civilizations. In 40,000 years, no one had ever defeated them. "We need help," Ji-yeon said. "Please, activate the defense network for Earth, just this once." Velroth tilted his head. "Earth is not part of the network. The vote was clear. 8 billion people will die. That is not our concern." Velroth's voice was cold as ice. You wanted to prove yourselves, Ambassador. Here is your chance. Survive the swarm. Then we will talk. Jiyon stared at him. She saw no mercy in those ancient eyes. No compassion, only the certainty of someone who had already decided she was not worth saving. You are leaving us to die, she whispered. We are letting you prove your worth, Velroth replied. Or prove that we were right about you all along. Consider it a test. The council began to leave. Seat after seat emptied. No one looked at Jiyon. No one offered help. She stood alone on the platform as the great hall grew quiet. Only one delegate paused. A reptilian figure with green scales and yellow eyes. Delegate Kira from the Scaled Confederation. She looked at Jiyon for a long moment. There was something in her gaze. Not quite sympathy. Perhaps curiosity. I am sorry, Kira said quietly, for what it is worth. Then she too was gone. Jiyon stood alone in the empty hall. The hologram still showed Earth. So small, so fragile, so very far away. She opened her communicator and sent a message to the only ship that could help, the UES Dauntless, Captain Yoon Taiho commanding. The message was short. They said no. The swarm is coming. We are on our own. Far away in the darkness of space, Captain Taiho read the message. He was 42 years old. He had fought in 3 wars. He had lost friends, ships, and pieces of himself along the way. He had seen the worst that space could offer. He read the message again. Then he looked out the window at the stars. So we fight alone, he said to himself. We have done it before. He turned to his crew. All hands, battle stations. The swarm is coming and no one is going to save us. So we will save ourselves. The Dauntless began to move. Behind it, 46 other human ships followed. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was all they had. And humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, did not know how to give up. The war room of the UES Dauntless was small and crowded. Captain Yoon Taeho stood at the center, surrounded by his officers. Lieutenant Kim Subin was at his right. Dr. Lee Hanwoo was at his left. On the screens around them, 46 other ship captains waited for orders. Let me be clear, Taeho said. His voice was calm. It was always calm. We have 47 ships. The swarm has 3,000. We are outgunned. We are outnumbered. And no one is coming to help us. He let those words hang in the air. No one spoke. Everyone knew the math. Everyone knew what 3,000 enemy ships meant. But, Taiho continued, behind us is Earth, 8 billion people, our families, our friends, everything we have ever known. If we fall, they fall. If we run, they die. Lieutenant Subin stepped forward. She was 29, sharp-eyed, and the best tactical officer in the fleet. She had been working on a plan since they received the news. Sir, I have studied the swarm. Their weakness is simple. They have never fought anyone willing to die. She pulled up images on the main screen. Every species they have attacked tried to escape. They ran. They surrendered. They begged for mercy. The swarm does not understand sacrifice. They do not expect it. Dr. Lee nodded slowly. He was the oldest person in the room, a scholar who had spent his life studying alien civilizations. She is right. In 40,000 years of records, no species has ever stood and fought the swarm to the end. They always break. They always run. Then we will be the first, Taiho said. What is the plan, Lieutenant? Subin took a deep breath. We fight dirty. We hide in asteroid fields. We use civilian ships as decoys. We split their fleet and attack in small groups. We make them pay for every inch of space. And when we find their command ship, we hit it with everything we have. Even if it costs us everything. Especially then. Taiho looked around the room. He saw fear in some eyes. He saw determination in others. These were good people. Brave people. They deserved better than this. Very well, he said. Tell the fleet. We fight. 2 days later, the Void Swarm arrived. They came out of darkness like a wave of black metal. 3,000 ships, each one bristling with weapons. They blocked out the stars. They filled the sky. On the bridge of the Dauntless, the crew stared at the screens in horror. A message came through. The voice was cold, mechanical, empty of emotion. This is Admiral Morthak of the Void Swarm. Submit. Your resources will feed our journey. Your deaths will be swift. Taiho walked to the communication console. He pressed the button. This is Captain Yoon Taeho of the United Earth ship Dauntless. We do not submit. We do not surrender. If you want our home, you will have to take it from us. There was a pause. Then the swarm attacked. The next 3 days were hell. Human ships hid in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. They attacked in groups of 3 or 4, striking fast and then disappearing. They used old cargo ships filled with explosives as bombs. They crashed damaged vessels into enemy formations. Sergeant Choi Mirei led her Marines onto enemy ships. They fought in dark corridors, in zero gravity, in freezing cold. They planted explosives in engine rooms. They opened airlocks. They did whatever it took. On the second day, Mirei's team boarded a swarm carrier. They were supposed to destroy the power core, but they got trapped. Enemy soldiers surrounded them. Mirei had 2 choices, surrender or fight. She chose to fight. "Marines!" she shouted. "They came to take our home. Let us show them what that costs." Her team pushed forward. They lost half their number in the first minute, but they reached the core. The explosion destroyed the carrier and took 40 enemy ships with it. Mirei survived. Barely. A rescue shuttle pulled her from the wreckage. She had burns on 60% of her body. She asked to go back to the fight. On the 3rd day, the cost became clear. 20 human ships destroyed. Millions dead on colony stations. The swarm kept coming. For every enemy ship they killed, 10 more took its place. But the swarm was confused. They had never seen anything like this. These humans did not run. These humans did not beg. These humans flew their ships into swarm formations and detonated their own reactors. These humans fought with knives when their guns ran out of ammunition. Admiral Morthak watched from his command nexus. For the first time in his long life, he felt something strange. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was doubt. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Subin found it. The command nexus, a massive ship at the center of the swarm fleet. It controlled all the others. Destroy it, and the swarm would fall into chaos. "Captain," she said, "I have a target, but reaching it will cost us everything we have left." Taiho looked at the screen. 12 ships remained, 12 ships against 300 enemy vessels guarding the nexus. "Can we win?" he asked. "I do not know," Subin admitted. "But we can try." Taiho stood up. He looked at his crew. They were exhausted. They were wounded. They were afraid. But they were still here. They were still fighting. "All ships," he broadcast. "This is Captain Taeho. We have found their heart. Follow me. We end this now." The 12 remaining human ships turned toward the Nexus. They flew into a wall of enemy fire. One by one they fell, but they kept going. They did not stop. They did not turn back. The Dauntless was hit, then hit again. Fires broke out. Hull breaches opened. Crew members were sucked into space. Still, the ship pushed forward. "Sir," Subin said, her voice shaking, "we are not going to make it. We are too damaged to fire weapons." Taiho looked at the Nexus on the screen. So close. So very close. "Then we become the weapon," he said. "All hands, abandon ship. I am taking the Dauntless in." "Sir, that is an order, Lieutenant. Get our people out. Someone has to tell Earth we did not break." The escape pods launched. The Dauntless flew on alone. Taiho stayed at the controls, guiding his dying ship toward the enemy's heart. He opened a final channel. His voice was broadcast to every human ship, every station, every person listening. Tell Earth we did not break. The Dauntless hit the Nexus at full speed. The explosion lit up the darkness of space. It spread from ship to ship. The chain reaction destroyed the Nexus, then the ships around it, then more and more. 80% of the swarm fleet vanished in a ball of fire. The survivors fled. For the first time in 40,000 years, the Void Swarm ran away. And in the wreckage of the Dauntless, rescue teams found Captain Yun Tai-ho, barely alive, burned and broken, but breathing. Humanity had won. The news reached the Galactic Council 3 days after the battle ended. It came in the form of sensor data, ship recordings, and a simple report. The Void Swarm had been defeated. At first, no one believed it. Delegates demanded to see proof. They called the report a mistake, a lie, impossible. The swarm had destroyed 100 civilizations. The swarm was unstoppable. The swarm did not lose. But the evidence was clear. The recordings showed everything. 3,000 swarm ships had entered the Sol system. Less than 600 escaped. And the species that defeated them? The same species that the Council had laughed at, the same species they had called children, the same species they had left to die. Delegate Kira sat alone in her quarters, watching the battle recordings for the 5th time. Her yellow eyes moved across the screen, taking in every detail. She saw human ships flying into certain death. She saw soldiers fighting without air in their lungs. She saw a captain crash his own vessel into the enemy's heart. She paused the recording on Captain Tai-ho's final message. His face filled the screen. Burned, bloody, but calm. So impossibly calm. Tell Earth we did not break. Kira turned off the screen. She sat in the darkness for a long time. Her people, the Scaled Confederation, were ancient warriors. They had fought many enemies over thousands of years. They understood battle. They understood sacrifice. But this was something else. This was a species that simply refused to accept defeat. She had watched Velroth deny the humans protection. She had said nothing. She had done nothing. And now 200 million humans were dead because the Council had decided they were not worth saving. The shame burned in her chest like fire. Across the station in the Great Hall, High Chancellor Velroth held an emergency meeting. His advisors surrounded him, speaking in urgent whispers. The mood was not celebration. It was fear. How did they do this? One advisor asked. Their technology is inferior. Their ships are weak. They should have died in the first hour. They did not follow any known tactical doctrine, another said. They used civilian ships as weapons. They rammed enemy vessels with their own bodies. They fought in ways that made no sense. Velroth said nothing. He stared at the reports in front of him. His ancient mind tried to understand what had happened. By every calculation, humanity should have been destroyed. The numbers were clear. The outcome should have been certain, but the humans had won. It was luck, Velroth finally said. Nothing more. They got lucky. His advisors nodded, but their eyes said something different. They did not believe him. He was not sure he believed himself. On Earth, the aftermath was terrible. The battle had saved the planet, but the cost was almost too much to bear. Colony stations across the system lay in ruins. Bodies floated in the wreckage. Rescue ships worked day and night, pulling survivors from the darkness. Of humanity's 47 warships, only 8 remained. The rest were gone, destroyed, sacrificed. 200 million people had died. Parents, children, friends, neighbors. The loss was beyond words. Every person on Earth knew someone who had not come back. Captain Yun Tai-ho woke up in a hospital bed 3 days after the battle. His body was wrapped in bandages. Machines beeped around him. Every breath hurt. Lieutenant Subin was sitting beside him. Her arm was in a cast. Her face was bruised, but she was alive. "You made it," Tai-ho whispered. "We both made it," Subin said. They pulled you from the wreckage. You were barely breathing. The doctor said it was a miracle. The swarm? Gone. The survivors fled. We won, Captain. We actually won. Taiho closed his eyes. He thought about all the people who had died, all the ships that would never come home, all the families that had been torn apart. Did we? He asked quietly. Subin did not answer. There was no good answer to give. Word of the victory spread across the galaxy. The reaction was mixed. Some species celebrated. They had hated the swarm for generations. They were glad to see them beaten at last. Others were worried. If these humans could defeat the swarm, what else could they do? What would stop them from becoming the next great threat? And some were ashamed. They had watched the Council deny humanity protection. They had done nothing to help. They had assumed the humans would die, and they had not cared. Now those same humans had done the impossible. They had saved themselves without anyone's help. They had proven that the Council was wrong. Ambassador Park Ji-yeon received hundreds of messages in the days after the battle. Some offered congratulations. Some offered trade deals. Some offered military alliances. She read none of them. Instead, she sat alone in her room on Nexus Prime, looking at a list of names, the names of the dead. 200 million names that scrolled across her screen, hour after hour, name after name. She had asked the Council for help. They had laughed at her. They had left her people to die. And now they wanted to be friends. Ji-yeon closed the messages. She opened a new document and began to write. It was a formal request to address the Council once more. Velroth approved the request within hours. He wanted to control the story. He wanted to explain that humanity's victory was a lucky accident. He wanted to make sure no one blamed the Council for what had happened. He had no idea what was coming. Ji-yeon sent a message to Captain Taeho. "Can you travel?" Taeho looked at the message. His doctor said he needed months of rest. His body said he could barely stand. He wrote back, "When do we leave?" 1 week later, a human shuttle docked at Nexus Prime. The galaxy was watching. Every news network, every information channel, every curious eye in 1,000 systems turned toward the station. They wanted to see the humans who had beaten death itself. They wanted to know how. The Great Hall was full. Every seat was taken. 400 species had come to watch. Word had spread that something important was going to happen. No one wanted to miss it. High Chancellor Velroth sat in his usual place, high above the central platform. He looked calm. He had prepared a speech. He would acknowledge humanity's survival, call it an interesting development, and remind everyone that the Council's decision had been correct. Humanity was still too young, too violent, too dangerous. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. Ambassador Park Ji-yeon walked in. She wore the same simple black suit she had worn before. Her face showed nothing, no anger, no fear, just cold determination. But she was not alone. Behind her walked Captain Yoon Taeho. A murmur ran through the hall. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone had seen the recordings. This was the man who had crashed his ship into the heart of the swarm. This was the man who should be dead. Taeho walked slowly. His body was still healing. Scars covered the left side of his face. He moved with a slight limp, but his eyes were clear and his back was straight. He did not look like a victim. He looked like a soldier. They reached the central platform. Ji-yeon stood at the front. Taeho stood beside her. Velroth spoke first, his voice filling the chamber. "We acknowledge humanity's survival. However, this council maintains that your species' violent tendencies make you unsuitable for—" "Play the video," Ji-yeon interrupted. Velroth stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? You showed them our wars," Ji-yeon said. Her voice was quiet but hard as steel. "You showed them our failures. Now I will show them something else. Play the video." The holographic display behind her flickered to life. The video began. It was not edited. It was not propaganda. It was raw footage from the Battle of Saul, ship cameras, helmet recordings, station sensors, everything. The council watched in silence. They saw a pilot named Han Yuna fly her damaged fighter into a swarm battleship. Her last words were, "For my daughter." The explosion took out the ship's engines. They saw Sergeant Choi Mireille and her Marines fighting in a corridor with no air. Their suits were torn. They were dying. But they kept fighting. They reached the power core. They set the explosives. Mireille gave the order to detonate while she was still inside. They saw the cargo ship Morning Light. The captain was a man named Baek Junho. He was 60 years old, a grandfather. When his ship was surrounded, he did not surrender. He flew into the center of the enemy formation and triggered his reactor. The explosion destroyed 12 swarm vessels. They saw an engineer named Kwon Ye-jin. She was trapped in a breached corridor. The air was rushing out. Instead of running, she used her own body to block the hole while her crew sealed the bulkhead behind her. She saved 30 people. She froze to death with her hands still pressed against the breach. They saw a mother named Shin Yunbi. She was on a dying station. There was no escape. The swarm was burning through the hull. She gathered the children in the shelter and sang to them, lullabies, old songs from Earth. She kept singing until the signal cut out. They saw wounded soldiers refusing evacuation. They saw medics running toward explosions. They saw ordinary people doing impossible things. And then they saw Captain Taiho. The footage showed the bridge of the Dauntless, fires everywhere, half the crew dead. The ship was falling apart. On the screen, Taiho sat at the controls. His face was calm. Blood ran down his cheek. All hands, "Abandon ship," his voice said through the recording. "I am taking the Dauntless in." The escape pods launched. The ship flew on, closer, closer. The Nexus filled the screen. And then Taiho's final words, "Tell Earth we did not break." The screen went white. The video ended. The Great Hall was completely silent. 400 species sat frozen in their seats. No one moved. No one spoke. Delegate Kira was the first to break the silence. She stood up slowly, her scales pale, her voice rough with emotion. "In all our histories," she said, "in all the records of all our peoples, we have never seen anything like this." She turned to face Velroth. Her yellow eyes burned with something that might have been anger, or maybe it was shame. "You called them children. You left them to die. And they defeated an enemy that has destroyed 100 civilizations." Her voice rose. "They did not do it with superior technology. They did not do it with ancient wisdom. They did it because they refused to give up. They did it because they were willing to die for each other." Other delegates began to stand. Some nodded. Some looked away in shame. A few began to speak, their voices mixing together. Velroth raised his hand for silence. His face was still calm, but something had changed in his eyes. The certainty was gone. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice was weaker than before. "They won through luck, through recklessness. It proves nothing about their worth." "Luck?" Kira laughed. It was not a kind sound. "I have been a soldier for 200 years. I know the difference between luck and courage. What I saw in that video was not luck, Chancellor. It was something you do not understand, something you have never understood." She turned to face the hall. "It was love. Love for their home. Love for their families. Love for each other. That is what defeated the swarm. Not weapons. Not ships. Love." The murmuring grew louder. More delegates stood. The mood in the hall was shifting. What had started as curiosity was becoming something else. Respect, admiration, and for many, deep shame. Ji-yeon watched it all in silence. She had said what she came to say. She had shown what she came to show. Now it was time to let the galaxy decide what it meant. The noise in the great hall grew louder. Delegates shouted at each other. Some demanded that humanity be welcomed into the council. Others called for investigations. A few sat in stunned silence, unable to speak at all. Ambassador Park Ji-yeon raised her hand. The hall slowly grew quiet. Everyone wanted to hear what she would say. "You laughed at us," she began. Her voice was calm, but there was fire beneath it. "You called us primitive. You said we were children playing with dangerous toys. You told us to come back in 10,000 years when we had grown up." She paused. The silence was absolute. "Then you left 8 billion people to face extinction. You had the power to help. You chose not to. You watched from safety while the swarm came to eat our world." Her eyes moved across the chamber, looking at face after face after face. 200 million humans died. 200 million. That is not just a number. Those were mothers and fathers. Those were children who never grew up. Those were friends who will never come home. Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. They died while your defense network sat idle. They died while you did nothing. Velroth tried to speak. The council's decision was made according to established. "I am not finished." Ji-yeon's voice cut through his like a knife. The Chancellor fell silent. "You thought we would die," she continued. "You thought we would break. You thought the swarm would swallow us like they swallowed all the others. And then you could shake your heads and say you were right all along. See? The humans were too weak, too young, too violent." She took a step forward. "But we did not break. We stood, we fought, and we won." Captain Taiho moved to stand beside her. He had been quiet this whole time, watching, listening. Now he spoke. His voice was rough from the injuries, but every word was clear. "I have been a soldier for 20 years, he said. "I have fought battles I did not expect to survive. I have lost friends. I have lost ships. I have lost pieces of myself that will never come back." He looked up at the delegates. "When the swarm came, I knew we would probably die. The numbers were impossible. Our ships were outmatched. We had no help, no allies, no hope." He paused. "But we fought anyway. Do you know why?" No one answered. "Because surrender was not an option. Because giving up is not something humans know how to do. Because behind us was everything we loved, and we would rather die than let it burn." His eyes found Velroth. "You called us children. Maybe we are. Maybe we are young and foolish and violent, but we are still standing. The swarm is not. That is the difference between us. We do not know when to quit." The hall erupted. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages. Some called for immediate action. Others demanded apologies. The scaled Confederation representative stood and formally apologized on behalf of her entire species. A vote was called, not about the defense network. That was no longer in question. The vote was about something bigger. Should humanity be given a permanent seat on the Security Council? The inner circle that directed galactic military strategy, the most powerful position any species could hold. The votes came in. Green light after green light after green light. Yes, 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 yes. 387 species voted yes. 12 abstained. 1 voted no. Velroth's Dominion was the only species to vote against. The Chancellor said nothing. His power had been broken. His certainty had been wrong. He sat in his seat like a statue, unable to accept what had happened. After the vote, Delegate Kira approached Captain Taiho. She moved slowly, respectfully. Her yellow eyes met his. "My people have a saying," she said. "You cannot know a species until you see what they will die for." She extended her clawed hand. "Now we know humanity. We will not forget." Taiho took her hand. "Neither will we." 1 year passed. The rebuilt UES Dauntless launched from Earth's orbital shipyard. It was bigger than before, stronger, better armed, a gift from 36 species who wanted to help humanity rebuild. Captain Taiho stood on the bridge. Beside him was Lieutenant Kim Subin, now his executive officer. The scars from the battle had faded, but they would never disappear completely. They were reminders, marks of what they had survived. "Course laid in, Captain," Subin reported. "First patrol mission, Outer Rim, alongside Allied fleets." Taiho nodded. "Take us out, Lieutenant." The Dauntless moved forward. Around it, ships from 12 species took formation. They were not just allies anymore. They were friends, partners, family. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Jiyan watched the launch on a view screen. A delegate approached her. He was young, curious, from a species that had only recently joined the Council. "Ambassador," he said, "everyone talks about what your people did. The battle, the sacrifice, the victory." He paused. "I have to ask, how did you endure what others could not?" Jiyan considered the question. It was the same question she had heard 100 times in the past year. Everyone wanted to know the secret. The trick, the special thing that made humans different. She smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. "We are human," she said simply. "We have always been stubborn." Far away, in the cold darkness between galaxies, the remnants of the Void Swarm gathered. They had been scattered, broken, humiliated. For the first time in 40,000 years, they had been beaten. Admiral Morthak floated in his command chamber. His fleet was a shadow of what it had been. His power was broken, but he was still alive. And he remembered. He remembered the species that had destroyed him. He remembered their small ships and their impossible courage. He remembered the captain who had crashed his own vessel into the heart of the swarm. "Humans," he whispered the word like a curse. "We will not underestimate them again." But somewhere, in a galaxy full of stars, a rebuilt ship flew toward new adventures. Its crew was ready. Its captain was calm. And on its hull, a name shone in the starlight. Dauntless. The humans had won, not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because they were human, and humans do not break.